Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Ray. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SR20 Academy. So thank you so much for joining our meeting today. And today we have a very special and honorable guest, Dr. Bolger. Hi, Dr. Bolger. Much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes. So I would like to give a brief introduction of Dr. Bolger's long history of background. So you guys are going to hear more from Dr. Bolger later. So now I can only just do a super brief introduction. So Dr. Bolger is actually the world's most learned scholar, as far as I know. Like I can say it's the modern Da Vinci. Yes. So Dr. Bolger has 17 top degrees from Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, Cambridge, Brown, Columbia, Dartmouth, and so forth, you name it. So Dr. Bolger has taught at Harvard University for 23 years and he selected students for planned guidance every year. And, like every year, at least one student get perfect acceptance rate from all these elite universities. So a big to Dr. Bolger, and thank you so much for joining us today. And at the same time, we also have another honorable guest, Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, hi. So Cynthia Law is the serial entrepreneur with zero to one experiences in education, real estate, F&B, tech company, there. So Cynthia is actually a graduate from Stanford Business School, and she is currently at Harvard Kennedy School for Public Policy Research. So welcome, Cynthia. Okay, so for this brief introduction, I would like to pass this to Dr. Bolger. I know you have a lot to share today, so please get started.
Great. Well, thank you, Ray, for that very nice introduction. And welcome to everyone. This is Ben Bolger. I'm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, 3 blocks from Harvard Square. This weekend, the Head of the Charles is taking place, which is an international rowing regatta. So if you were with me, you'd be seeing literally hundreds of rowing boats out my window at the Charles River. So it's a very beautiful time of the year to be at Harvard and in the greater Boston area. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about my very unique approach to helping to prepare students several years in advance for college admission. And my approach is very unique and very effective. So I have a lot of material to cover in about the next hour. So let's get started. The first is, if you're a parent or if you're a student, one of those two categories, it's very important that you have a clear set of objectives. You cannot say, I'm not sure where I want to go to college. That's fine in the beginning, but once you are in high school as a freshman, or certainly by a sophomore year, it's important to develop a clear set of goals. So some of you might have Harvard as a goal, others might have Stanford, others might have Columbia. Whatever college it is, it's important to have a very clear goal of where you want to study or where you want your son or daughter to study. However, as I'm sure you're painfully aware, the odds of normal admission to these colleges are very challenging. We had almost 60,000 applicants to Harvard with a 4% or lower acceptance rate to Harvard, to Stanford, to Columbia. Very, very challenging set of conditions. So if you only look at the odds, and most of the applicants that are applying are self-selected. People that are applying to these colleges are very good students. They have extremely strong grades and test scores. And so you're dealing with a very high level of competition. So how do you persevere and go from just dealing with odds to turning it into more of a certainty that you will be admitted to a top college? So that's the focus of my discussion. The first question I would ask yourself is, do you have a strategy right now today? Do you have a strategy in place, a strategy that will help your son or daughter obtain admission to a selective college. And related to that is, are there 3 things that you could clearly identify that make your son or daughter truly unique from the best students in the country or around the world? Are there 3 factors that make them stand out compared to the very best students around the world? So if you have an answer to that question right now, that's great. You're in very good shape. But I think many parents at this stage and many students don't have a clear answer. And that's one of the things that I'm going to focus on in today's talk. Just a little bit about me. I think it's relevant to discuss. I've been doing this for more than 23 years. Virtually all the clients I work with, above 98% of the students I work with, get accepted to one of their top 3 choices. Every year, I have students that want to study at Stanford, that get admitted to Yale, that want to study at Columbia, but get admitted to Princeton. There is some fluctuation, but among the top 3 choices that they have, generally speaking, we get them into at least one of those goals. And I work with people years in advance, so that by the time we submit the applications, you can be very confident of the result. And so I really focus on a transformational process of growth, of turning students who are great into truly exceptional students. And I'll be discussing that. But since 2001, I've consistently focused on admitting students to top 10 colleges, in some cases top 15 colleges, but generally top 10 colleges in the United States, and also Oxford and Cambridge in England. I think those are great schools beyond America that are worth considering as well. And so here's just some examples of the results. Generally, when I work with students, we're really focusing on very specific colleges and very specific results. So one question sometimes people ask is, when should we start? When should we start the process? A lot of parents and students really think actively about this question as juniors in high school, and that's very typical. But I'm a big advocate of starting as a freshman, as a sophomore in high school, or even earlier. Here's a great example of a student that I've been working with since age 5. At age 6, she published her first children's book. At age 8, see, she's 8 now, she's performed twice in 1 year as a soloist at Carnegie Hall. And has done rehearsals with Tony Bennett, and has been involved in a variety of public policy issues and so forth. So I work with people at a very young age. Most of the clients I work with, freshmen in high school or later, but I work with people of all ages that are very ambitious. Here's the book that was published at age 6. So what we're going to focus on today is both strategy and tactics. What I call strategy is the first 3 years of high school, freshman, sophomore, and junior. So if I start working with your son or daughter in those first 3 years, we're going to be focusing on strategy. And then so today, in this brief presentation, I have many strategies to go over, but we're going to focus on 3 today. What I call the strategy of uniqueness, how it's very important to focus on niche areas, and also have everything in your life.
你现在还有一会儿，你听一下这个讲座，我给你发了，这是一个很有名的 college 的，它是MIT 什么什么好。
Yep. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Sorry. We're only 3 years into the pandemic, and we're still learning Zoom, so we're good. And then the final year as a senior, beginning really in the summer between your junior and senior year, we start aggressively working on the college applications. And there are a lot of tactical considerations. How do you write an exceptional personal statement, which is really your chance to communicate your own voice? How do you get truly amazing letters of recommendation? And how do you master a college interview? So we'll talk briefly about that at the end of the presentation as well. So before we get into that, let me just say a word or two about myself. You should know who you're listening to, and why should you take advice from a so-called expert. Well, to begin, as a very young boy, I loved learning. My mother was a professor, and I went everywhere with her, and I absolutely loved learning as a very young boy. However, by the time I was in second grade, I was diagnosed with severe dyslexia, which is a type of learning disability. And so, for example, I still today intuitively want to spell words phonetically. So, for example, the word phone, I would want to spell F-O-N, O-N. But of course, it's spelled a weird way, P-H-O-N-E, which doesn't make sense. Or we are in the month of October. I think of October as the 8th month because in octagon or octopus, OCT means 8. And that's the 10th month. So I'm a very logical reader and speller, and unfortunately, this language is irrational. So I had some problems with my dyslexia, and that caused a lot of problems. By third grade, teachers said, you are not high school material. You certainly aren't going to go to college, and we don't even think you're going to get a high school diploma. We have no expectations for you because of your severe dyslexia. We think you should think about a vocational career. And so my mother was disheartened by that. And I eventually dropped out of third grade. My mother, who was a professor, retired early and decided to homeschool me. And she took me physically. We were studying history. We went out to Gettysburg to study the Civil War. We were studying physics. We went to Florida and saw space shuttles take off. I had a very hands-on learning experience. So I went from a grade school dropout, not a high school dropout, but a grade school dropout, to later earning my doctorate at Harvard. And so because my mother learned how to provide an individualized learning experience that was custom tailored for me, I went from a dropout with no diploma. Still today, I don't have a high school diploma. But then discovering how to master learning to get all A's in every subject in college. The lowest grade I ever had was an A. Most grades were A pluses. And I was accepted literally to every place I applied, including every Ivy League school, Stanford, and so forth. And so because of that experience, because I experienced failure and almost was paralyzed by failure, I realized the importance of having a good mentor that understands how you as an individual uniquely learn. So one of the things I love to do is help mentor young people because I saw the impact on my own life. So briefly, today, some of my accomplishments are that I started college at age 12, which is very young. I earned my first US patent on an original idea at age 13. So I became a millionaire at 13, very successful. I'm originally from Michigan, so University of Michigan is a top 25 college. It's not a top 10, but top 25, but not bad. I went to University of Michigan as an undergrad, graduated with perfect 4.0 GPA. After that, I went to work at the White House. I worked for Bill Clinton in the press office with Mike McCurry. And I was still young, and I had plenty of time and a little extra money. So I then was very curious, and I went on to complete graduate degrees. First, I spent 3 years at Oxford and Cambridge in England, getting degrees from both Oxford and Cambridge. Then I went on to study neurocognition, how the brain works at Stanford. I did 2 graduate degrees at Columbia. I then did my doctorate, my first doctorate at Harvard, and then also degrees from Harvard, our other degrees from Brown and Dartmouth and Brandeis and a few other places. So I have more than 14 graduate degrees. I love also teaching. And so I taught at Harvard for 23 years. And of those 23 years, 13, I won 13 awards for teaching excellence. Most professors are lucky to get 1 award for teaching excellence. I was humbled to receive 13 awards for teaching excellence. And then I've, while I was a student at Oxford and Cambridge, I was a very effective debater at the international level, going to tour world debating tournaments, winning the Stanford Public Speaking Tournament, and many others. So, I have been a student. I have applied successfully and been admitted to all the colleges that you probably are considering. And I've also taught at several great universities and won awards. So from a 360-degree angle, I have been there and I've done that. So I think that it's a good set of advice that I can offer to you. So, whether it's working on presidential debates or debating at Oxford and Cambridge, I have a lot of experience in a variety of different areas. And not only are you listening to my advice, but I spend time with a lot of thought leaders around the world. Here we have Derek Bach, football with Derek Bach, one of the presidents of Harvard, Larry Summers, another president of Harvard, and then one of my friends from when I was at the University of Cambridge in England, who recently passed away, Stephen Hawking. And I was a neighbor of his and would go over to have dinner at his house on a regular basis. And then I've also been doing political consulting in the past. And here we have pictures with every living president. So, a lot of interesting people are happy to listen to what I have to say. So, if you look at people, if you're looking for a consultant, who else literally has studied and completed degrees at all of these universities here? I believe I'm literally the only one. So I offer some unique advice in that regards. Enough about me. Let's talk about you and your children. All right. So the first point is transformation possible? I would argue it is, because in third grade, I was on track to be a dropout and having a vocational job. We're digging ditches or pumping gas or something like that. And fortunately, I was very lucky to be able to have an extraordinary experience of transformation. I actually believe whoever you go with, whoever you consult with, it is very important to have a strong and skilled mentor. If you look at any of the modern day if you look at historic Greek mythology or modern day mythology, every hero in every story has at least a mentor. Some of you, depending on your age, may remember the original Star Wars trilogy. Luke Skywalker, a Jedi Knight, he had this little green guy, Yoda, as his mentor. I'm Yoda, and kind of guided him to becoming a Jedi. More recent films like The Karate Kid had a mentor named Mr. Miyagi. And for those of you who are younger in the audience, you may remember Harry Potter had Professor Dumbledore. So the point is, if we look at traditional Greek mythology or modern day pop culture, it's important to have someone who is skilled in guiding you. Very few people can do it by themselves. If anyone says they were truly self-made, the odds are they've had a mentor in the process. So my point is, whether you choose to ask me to mentor you or find someone else, it is useful to find an exceptional mentor to help your son or daughter navigate preparation for college. So let's now talk about specifically how we can move toward your dreams. You, as a parent, I'm sure have a dream of where you want your son or daughter to attend college. And I want to honor that dream and say it's possible if you truly have the right strategic approach. So let's dive into the specifics of that. Most people, most parents correctly obsess over having strong grades and test scores for their children. That is critical. In our real economy, money is a currency that we use. In academia, the equivalent of currency is grades. You must have A grades. You can have a few A minuses, you can even have 1 or 2 B pluses, but in general, you should have as many A's as possible. That's very important. In some cases, we can navigate around that, but in general, it's important to have as many A's as possible. There's a lot of discussion today about supposedly test optional colleges. That is very misleading. There are no test optional colleges except for the University of California system, which do not accept test scores in any way. Other colleges that are so-called test optional will accept test scores. And if your son or daughter got a 1590 out of 1600 or a 1600 out of 1600 or a 35 out of 36 in the ACT or a 36 out of 36, are you telling me you're not going to submit those test scores? Of course you are. The only reason you're not going to submit a test score is if you have a bad test score or if you didn't take the test. So in either way, that's a disadvantage. So there's no test optional situation. You can not submit your test. And again, there are some circumstances where that can work out in your favor. but in very well-defined situations. In general, you have to have a good test score as well. So those are two important things, but clearly those are not enough to get you into the 4% that would be admitted to Harvard or the 3.9% that would be admitted to Stanford. So the reality is that you have to master all these other characteristics. You have to have amazing personal statements, college-specific essays, extracurricular activities that are truly amazing, impactful community service. Every summer, your son or daughter's in high school, they have to be doing something that is unmatched by their peers. They can't do other things that are similar. They have to do things that are unmatched by their peers, and then get amazing letters of recommendation and have incredible interview performance, etc. So we'll get into those things. But how do you get to that? College admissions is not just about writing a beautifully worded essay. It's what you say in the essay. It's what you say in the essay that distinguishes you, that sets you apart from your competition. And specifically, I like to say that you should have 3 things that will set you apart from your competition. So now we're going to turn to talking about strategy. Again, I have about 16 items of strategy. Because of time constraints, we're going to focus on 3, but these 3 are very powerful. So I think if you get nothing else from this lecture, if you pay attention to these 3 strategic points, you will be moving your son or daughter very much forward in the process. So I want to talk about the importance of uniqueness, niche, and interconnectedness. So the first thing is I'd like to dispel an important misconception. If you send your son or daughter to a very good high school, and I hope most of you are, a private high school or a public high school, I work regularly with students from Andover and Choate and Groton and Exeter and incredible private high schools on the East Coast, some on the West Coast, some internationally. Most of these high schools focus on providing a liberal arts education, which means they want students to become very well-rounded. You should know a little bit about Shakespeare, a little bit about chemistry, a little bit about physics, a little bit about humanities. That's great. That's great. That's the type of education we want. But if I were to place 10 well-rounded students in front of you and to say, pick one that stands out, you'd have a tough time because they're all well-rounded. They're all very good in many subjects. But what makes them stand out? If your son or daughter is only well-rounded, meaning they get a lot of excellent grades in many different subjects, that is a prerequisite for being a good student. But unfortunately, that is not enough. And most high schools stop here. They stop at helping your son or daughter becoming well-rounded, but they don't help them become necessarily exceptional in a specific area. And I think that's what's really missing. If you think about your own professional careers, whatever sector or industry you're in, the more specialized and the more effective and expert you are, the more valuable you are. Let's, to take medicine, for example. If you're a general practitioner, a family doctor, that's great. But generally speaking, if you have an advanced complication, you will be referred to an expert. So a general practitioner might refer you to a neurologist, right? But then if you have further complications, hopefully you don't, you might be referred to a neuro-oncologist, someone that focuses on tumors in the brain, for example. A neuro-oncologist is more valuable, makes more money, and is in more demand than a simple neurologist. And a neurologist is more in demand than a GP. We all agree this. In any industry, this is the case. The more specialized, the more achieved you are in that industry, the more valuable you are. This rule applies to your high school student. And they need to be going from the metaphorical equivalent of a general practitioner to a neurologist. And if they work with me, they will become the equivalent of a neuro-oncologist, someone who is truly the best in a very narrowly defined niche area where they have unquestioned excellence, and they beat out their competition. If they get to that level, their chances of getting admitted to a very good college are extremely strong. So that's the importance of being very unique. You can't, it is not acceptable. I know a lot of high school students are like, oh, I'm not really sure what I want to do. I have an undeclared major. Yes, it is possible. It's possible to be admitted if you're undeclared, but the odds are not with you. And there's certainly no certainty that that approach will work. The approach of being very unique is what I think is critical, one critical element. So let's just look at a few examples, historical examples. If you look at, so since I'm at Harvard, I have Crimson background. I'm 3 blocks away from Harvard. You'll have to forgive me. I use a lot of Harvard examples. For those of you that like Yale or Stanford, I'm sorry, but I also attended those schools, so we can use those examples. But I'll use a few Harvard examples for the moment. Yo-Yo Ma, the great cellist, when he applied to Harvard, he already was a virtuoso as a cellist. I'm sure he was well-rounded. I'm sure he understood Shakespeare and chemistry and physics and anthropology. But he was admitted to Harvard because it was clear as a young man applying to Harvard from high school that he was going to be a virtuoso in the cello. And he was admitted on that basis. Other examples, Bill Gates famously and Mark Zuckerberg both famously dropped out of Harvard. 2 different generations, but when they both applied to Harvard to study computer science, decades apart, it was clear from what they had done in high school, it was clear that they were going to be pioneers in the field of computer science for their generation. So there's many, many examples here that if you can demonstrate that you truly are going to change an area of our society, you are going to get admitted to a great place. You can be Jane Goodall and want to study chimpanzees in far-flung parts of Africa. She was admitted to the University of Cambridge. She demonstrated a level of focused expertise when she applied to that school. And so I really believe there's so many examples where this strategy of uniqueness works. So you have to forgive me for a minute. I'm a little bit of a nerd. I'm an academic. And so let me just dive a little deeper into why I focus on uniqueness. In the 20th century, we looked at intelligence as really 2 things, verbal skills and quantitative skills. And still today, if you look at the SAT or ACT, it really tests for those 2 things, verbal ability and quantitative ability. But in the 21st century, we've started to rethink what is intelligence. So if I just give you 2 examples here, 2 very famous men that are widely considered to be geniuses. Albert Einstein, if you saw the recent movie that was out, Oppenheimer, this summer, one of the characters is Einstein in that movie. Anyway, Einstein, I think clearly people would argue is a genius. He helped literally redefine how we understand gravity and the mechanics of physics. Clearly, he was a quantitative and rational genius, no question about that. But our other friend in this photo, Pablo Picasso. Before Pablo Picasso, most art collectors and museums and artists focused on realism. When you painted something, it looked like the equivalent of a photograph before photography existed. It was realism in nature. Pablo Picasso redefined our understanding of aesthetics. He challenged whether art can be abstract and impressionist. And I mean, he really helped define an era of cubism and so many other areas. But it's not clear that he was great at verbal skills or mathematical skills, but clearly a genius. So one of my mentors at Harvard, who I've long admired, is Professor Howard Gardner, who's still alive. He's still alive. And he proposed a theory called the theory of multiple intelligences. And he argued that instead of 2 dimensions of intelligence, verbal and quantitative, there's 8 dimensions. And one of them being, for example, aesthetics. So Pablo Picasso would be considered an aesthetic or visual genius, even though he might score very low in verbal and quantitative skills. In the world of academia, the theory of multiple intelligences is very well embraced and very well respected. And that certainly inspired my thinking on intelligence. To my knowledge, I'm one of the only consultants, I think the only consultant, that uses the theory of multiple intelligences to help prepare students in high school for college. So your son or daughter may be a classically intelligent student in verbal and quantitative skills. If that's true, that's great. They may be a master in quantitative skills. Fantastic. You might also have a son or daughter that is underperforming in these two traditional areas. But there's actually 6 other dimensions of intelligence that we don't normally look at. And so the first thing I do when I take on a new student is I do a 6-hour, very detailed neuropsychological evaluation, a hybrid that I've specifically devised that incorporates the theory of multiple intelligences. And so I usually will find counterintuitive connections with students. They may be very strong in quantitative skills, but they also might be very strong in visual skills. They might have great visual thinking, like Picasso, and they might have great quantitative thinking. And there's an area of mathematics that responds very effectively to visual mathematics. One student I worked with was a visual mathematician. Later on, when I was helping mentor him, we got him an opportunity to work directly with Mr. Rubik, the guy that invented the Rubik cube. And he developed the student developed his own visual puzzle that was equally challenging, like the Rubik's cube. I'm very good at connecting people with amazing experts. If I'm only an expert in a few things, but if, for example, I have a student that truly has a promising career in the cello, I have connected students with Yo-Yo Ma, or Itzhak Perlman, or Joshua Bell, great violinists. So I'm a big believer in having students work directly with people that have changed the world. And that is how you become truly exceptional yourself. But my point is that when I work with people, and I don't know, I hope you can see all 5 of these little boxes, but the way I approach things is, first, I evaluate students using a very data-driven, slightly boring, I got to admit, but it's a very data-driven evaluation process. It goes beyond a neuropsychological evaluation. And you will learn, even though you know your son or daughter very well, you will learn very surprising things about how their brain works and what type of thinker they are. So that's the first step that I use is, let's not just have a random solution for how your son or daughter should think about their high school. Let's actually think about how is their brain cognitively structured, organically and physiologically constructed, and then what type of learning experience is best for them. If you just think about your own learning experience as a parent, some of you have amazing educational experiences yourself. Did you ever have a class in how to learn? Most of you have focused your entire life on content, whether it's computer science or business or whatever the topic is. But have you had a robust education in how your brain is structured and how you learn? So that's first step, is every student is unique, just like fingerprints on your hand are all unique. The way our brains work is very different. And, most people, the 80% in the middle of the bell curve, fit in traditional schooling, but it's still important to have an individualized plan. So the first step when I work with folks is I do a very extensive, highly specialized evaluation to understand how they think, they learn, and what should happen for the next 3 or 4 years of their high school education, or 2 years, or whatever time we have to work with them. Then, after we have a very data-driven evaluation, I develop a very specialized plan with each student, always custom tailored. If you're thinking about a dress or a suit, do you want an off-the-rack suit or do you want couture? Do you want a dress that was specifically tailored for you? When we go to a gala or ball or festive, we're always going to have a custom tailored outfit, aren't we? Why shouldn't our education be the equivalent? So very important. So we develop a very individualized plan of how your son or daughter can develop at least 3 things that are unique about them that no one else in their high school or their state or their region is doing. It has to be very, very unique. Then the first 3 years, whether I start working with people as a junior or as a sophomore, as a freshman, whenever it is, we focus on the strategy of implementing that. So you have to build up evidence. You can't just say, oh yeah, I'm really great at this. You have to show specific evidence, proof of excellence. And then the senior year, beginning in the summer between junior and senior year, we're going to focus on college applications. But we're actually going to have a lot to write about, a lot that's unique and different that will make you stand out. That's very, very important. And then lastly, after I get folks accepted to college, which I always do, I then, before we stop working together, I focus on the transition from high school to college. High school is very structured. Your whole day is planned out, no matter what high school you go to. College, you have an unusual amount of free time, and you're transitioning to different environments. And right now we're focusing on college admissions, but most of your sons and daughters will go on to graduate school at some point. And so if they're going to go from Harvard to Stanford Medicine, or from Yale to Columbia for architecture, or Stanford to Yale Law School, whatever it is, they have to have A's and good grades in college as well. And so before I stop working with people, I help them transition to college, which there's a longer discussion on that, but very important. For example, the first week of college, you usually can shop for classes. In high school, there's one teacher that's going to teach economics. At Harvard, there's 4 or 5 professors that will teach intro to econ. And there's literally a shopping period where you can shop for the first week or two and find exactly the right professor. Unbelievably, freshmen don't take advantage of that. It's like shopping for the right jurors in a jury trial. Very important to do. Anyway, so there's a transition period. So we go from the beginning to the end, no matter where your student is at, even if they're a junior, it's important to start this process. Okay, so we're going to use a very rigorous evaluation process that's driven by insights on multiple intelligence to develop a customized learning approach. And I will help you, if you can't answer that question, I will help you with collaborating with your son or daughter to develop what are those 3 things that are going to truly make them unique to stand out, and how can we do that and implement that over time. What's not unique? Your son or daughter is a smart student. That's great. But unfortunately, everyone applying to Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, they're all smart. They're all hardworking. They're all president of several clubs in high school, and they're all nice people. So those are great things, but they're not unique. So, we have to truly find things that are unique. Uniqueness, evidence in a niche area, and everything needs to be comprehensively connected. If you're focusing on math, don't work at a soup kitchen for community service. If your son or daughter is a mathematician, then one of their community service activities could be founding a unique organization that teaches financial literacy to students. That relates to their focus on math. So everything they do should be quantitatively focused if they're a math nerd. I say that with love. But they shouldn't do random things. Everything should be connected to one another. Let's look at a couple quickly. Let's look at a couple case studies to show this in action. And I, sometimes I work with people that present themselves. They have potential, but they're not optimizing their life. So just a before and after. Talk about transformation. So here's a student that wanted to study biology when I first met them. Okay, that's a very popular major. If you're pre-med, a very popular major. They love to play the drums. Okay, they like to play video games, which in my opinion is a complete waste of time. How many people are famous by playing video games? No one. They like to play role-playing games. All right. They love sushi and they vacation in Hawaii. I was like, all right. I did a very detailed evaluation process. Afterwards, I said, look, forget about biology. Biology is a very competitive major. It's tough to distinguish yourself in biology. But your whole life, you're around the water. Like even what you eat, your food you love comes from the water. You vacation in Hawaii. Everything you love is water-based. What about marine biology? Which is a very niche major, very uncommon major, especially compared to biology. He liked to play the drums. I was like, okay, well, you like sound. So specifically within the area of marine biology, let's focus on acoustic-based research and focus us specifically on acoustic pollution. So most people that study marine biology focus on the physical things that get placed in the water, but it's even more uncommon to focus on the sound that is made in, for example, harbors like the Baltimore Harbor or the harbor in Boston or the Hudson River in New York. Believe it or not, the sound that is made by humans deeply impacts aquatic life in that environment. And he specifically spent several years focusing on the problem of acoustic pollution within the context of marine biology. That's an example of being unique. That's an example of being very niche focused. And then everything we did for the next several years was focused in that area. So he took a class at the Harvard Summer School. A lot of folks take summer classes as high school students at universities. He took a specific class on marine life and ecosystems, befriended the professor. I said, look, here's a way that you should get to know the professor. Befriended the professor. The professor became a research collaborator with him. I was able to get him an internship at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, which is one of the most prestigious marine biology focused institutions. Again, acoustic pollution was his focus. He did another internship in Hurricane Island, which is in Maine. He did dolphin sonar, again, acoustic related, in Costa Rica. He published a paper with a professor from Stanford, again, in marine biology. And as a student club, I said, look, no one cares about drums and rock and roll, but he happened to be Asian. I said, like, let's reconnect with your roots, your cultural roots. And he founded an Asia diaspora drumming club. That sounds a lot better than rock and roll. Asian diaspora drumming club that focused on his roots. And so a complete transformation over a brief time period. One of his parents went to Cornell. He was very interested in getting admitted to Cornell because of that. They hadn't donated any real money. By the way, if you're an alumnus and you haven't donated 10 million, they don't care. If you've donated 10 million or more, that will influence the admissions process. If you're an alumnus and you've given 100,000 here, 100,000 there, really no impact, unfortunately. So they were an alumnus. They hadn't really donated anything important, but they wanted to go to Cornell. He applied, early decision, and Cornell has a great marine biology department, and he was literally ranked either number 1 or number 2 as the students applying to marine biology. He did not have amazing grades or test scores, by the way, but he mastered this niche. And when all the thousands of applications came into Cornell, he was admitted. All right. So this is a very detailed example of how this approach works. A few other quick examples. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the before and just focus on the afterward, just to give you a sense of the level of accomplishment that is important. Here's a student that was at Andover, which is one of the oldest prep schools. It has the oldest high school newspaper in America. And I worked with her to lean in and become the editor. I was like, look, if you want to be a leader, you can't be deputy editor. No one cares about that. You got to become the editor. And I helped her to develop sharp elbows so that she could accomplish that. The Iowa Writers Workshop is regarded as one of the most important, I don't know why it's in Iowa, but it's the most important writers' workshops. We got her there. Columbia awards a Pulitzer Prize. And so she studied at Columbia because their writing program is exceptional. So not just a random Ivy League, but specifically for that. She established her own online journal. She was published in very specific literary publications that were prestigious. She won several awards. She mentored for community service. She mentored students. She created a mentorship process in creative nonfiction for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. She wasn't volunteering in a soup kitchen, something that's random. Her community service was interconnected with everything she was doing, which was being a writer. She also founded an organization that dealt with food insecurity to show that she has a heart. And then for an extracurricular activity, she did poi spinning, which is kind of twirling things with fire. Very beautiful, very unique extracurricular activity. And that worked, and she was admitted to Stanford. Two other examples. Sometimes I deal with people that want to be very physical. So one of my students fancied himself like Jacques Cousteau, very famous expedition explorer. And I was like, all right, so you're not really going to be an academic, but you're going to be this physical person. But you really got to lean into this. So he became a maximum certified scuba diver. We talked about like what can you do that's really extreme. He did cage diving where there's sharks. Like literally went into the water in a cage and there's sharks swimming around. Now we had to document this, right? You just can't make this stuff up. So then we had to have a submersible kind of like I don't know, drone, but it's underwater that then was able to photograph and video him cage diving with several sharks swimming around him. Awesome stuff. Again, he pushed himself to the limits. He signed up and prepared for months upon months to summit Mount Everest, which is a very physically demanding activity. He did not make it to the top. I was like, dude, you don't want to die. So, your parents love you. You don't make it to the top, it's not the end of the world. So he partially summited Mount Everest and then ultimately turned around. But that was a great essay. It was about an essay about learning from failure. He wanted to summit. He didn't get to the top, but he climbed part of Mount Everest, which is a great story. There's these, when you apply to business school, you always have to write an essay about what you learned from failure. As an undergraduate applicant, he is able to write about that. He did climb all the way to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, which is not that hard. And then he was Chinese by background. And I was like, look, let's lean into something that's politically interesting. And he went to Tibet. He got on a bike and he literally biked hundreds of miles around Tibet, interviewed rural villagers, did some handmade drawings, and reflected on the anti-democratic dynamics of Tibet. Very controversial. Certainly wouldn't want to write about that in China, but to American institutions that are very liberal, that are very pro-Tibet, it deeply resonated with that audience. So again, when we write these essays, you got to know your audience. And for that audience, that hit perfectly. He took boxing lessons with Mike Tyson, and really cool stuff. So true Renaissance guy, physicality, not an A student by any means, but was able to show that he would contribute to the Harvard culture in a different way. And he was admitted to Harvard, which is first choice. So definitely didn't have all A's by a mile, but truly an interesting person and distinguished himself that way. One other example, I deal with a lot of folks who are Asian American or of Chinese background. Culturally, they it's a group that really respects and admires education. Yet the reality is subject to reverse discrimination, regardless of whether there's a Supreme Court decision or not. The reality is, folks will be facing reverse discrimination. That's just the way it is. I don't like it, but we have to work within that reality. So here's a student who primarily was of Chinese background. And again, when I work with people, I do a very, very detailed assessment of them. And I said, look, tell me about your great-great-great-grandparents. One of her great-great-grandparents, obviously a lot of Chinese have the Han ethnicity, and some of the Han ethnicity folks have moved to Cambodia over the years. And one of her great-grandparents was from Cambodia. So I was like, look, let's skip focusing on China. Your Chinese background is fantastic, but there's a lot of applicants with that background. There's only about 10 or 12 million Cambodians, as opposed to 1.5 billion Chinese. Let's focus on your Cambodian identity. And so she did a project where she supported a nonprofit organization that is removing landmines that are unexploded from the Vietnam War era in Vietnam and Cambodia. Still today, thousands of farmers in rural areas in Cambodia lose limbs or are injured by undetonated landmines. So she was involved in that. She got involved in some human trafficking organizations and really focused on celebrating the heritage of her Cambodian background, which was a legitimate part of her. And she was able to get accepted to her first choice, which is the University of Chicago. And there's a lot of folks from Andover that end up going to Chicago for some reason. So those are 4 examples, hyper-focused, very results-driven. I want to leave time for questions and answers. I'm going to talk for another 10 or 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, then we'll go to Q&A. But needless to say, every piece of advice I give to students is based on data-driven theories. In the Q&A, if you want to ask about any of these theories, I'll be happy to spend quite some time. But everything I advise is based on that. Let me make one other strategic point about extracurriculars before we start talking about tactics. Everyone says, oh, we should do extracurriculars. Well, that's true. That's very true. But I want to ask you a question. I'm sure all of you know these men. These are all founders of very successful companies, correct? Everyone knows all these people, obviously, right? But who is the current CEO of Microsoft or Amazon or Google? Apple, we all know, Tim Cook, because every year he makes these big visual presentations. But we all remember the founders of these organizations. How many of you, well, you're a smart group, so you probably actually know these answers. But the average American, how many of them could name the current CEO of Microsoft or even Amazon or Google? I bet they couldn't, right? We remember the founders. So briefly, we don't have time to go into this, but when I work with students, if you're just president of a student club or nonprofit organization, I think that's somewhat forgettable. Everyone, all your competition will be president of X, Y, or Z. I really like to see students become founders of innovative student organizations. We remember founders more than we remember leaders. So I don't want your son or daughter just to be a leader. If they're just a CEO, they might become forgettable. If they're just president of a club, they might be forgettable. If they found something that has a unique solution, that is a point of differentiation. So again, we're out of time in this area, but I think you get the point. We want your son or daughter to be a founder and very successful at that. You guys should always keep portfolios of everything you do. When you're taking photographs, you need to document everything. When you submit a college application, you can actually submit a visual portfolio. No one does it, but you can do it. They say a photograph is worth 1,000 words. It is. For the next 4 years, the next 3 years, the next 2 years, the next 1 year, before you apply to college from high school, you need a photograph as evidence everything you've done. You can make wild claims, but you will get true believers out of admissions officers if you support it with documented photographs. So I love to see photographs of everything. You got an iPhone, take the photograph, put it in a folder now, so that when you apply, you'll be able to curate those photographs. Very important. Obviously, portfolios are important. In 7 minutes or so, let's go through tactics. The heart of this discussion is on strategy, because I like to work with people a year or two in advance of applying to college. But briefly, let me give you a preview of your senior year. Like when you're applying, if you're a senior, you're applying now. You're submitting your applications in October. If you're with me, you'd be submitting them in September. But September, October is the time for early action, early decision. You got to take action. That's when you're shifting from strategy. How do you differentiate yourself from the competition? How do you have 3 things that make you unique? To the tactics of how do you actually put together an application that sets your son or daughter apart. Let's talk about 3 quick examples of the details that matter. First, personal statements. Everyone has to write a personal statement. And then you also have to write college-specific essays. So you write one personal statement, it goes to all the colleges, but every college you apply to will require unique essays for that college. Stanford has 6. Yale has 6. You're going to write upwards of 45 to 70 unique college-specific essays. So it's not just one essay, it's many essays. ChatGPT is not going to help you yet. It'll write some well-written essays, but it's not going to write an essay that advocates for your son or daughter effectively. A personal statement must have all 3 of these characteristics. 80% of the personal statements I look at for people that are applying last minute, that want last minute help from me, which I always regret agreeing to, but I'm a nice person, so I always say, okay, I'll help a few people last minute. They lack these characteristics. I want to read in the personal statement up front, what are 3 things that make you unique? If you don't have that, you're going to get rejected. What motivates you? A lot of the essays focus on, I did this, I did that. Great descriptions, but I never understand, why are you motivated to do this? And then at an even deeper existential level, why? Why do you want to attend this university? Why Stanford? Not because it has beautiful weather, not Columbia because it's in New York City. You can't, you get rejected if you say something as idiotic as that. But why do you want to invest your life being a computer scientist? Why do you want to change the world in a very focused and specific way? You have to answer that question squarely. 80% of the essays never do that. Just to prove this point, some of you, this is a silly point, but I think very powerful. If you're going to admit Superman or Batman, to college, who's a stronger applicant? Superman can fly. He has laser beams. He's the man of steel. He has no vulnerability except for kryptonite. Batman has a fancy suit and a nice car. If you had to choose between admitting Superman or Batman, who's a stronger applicant? Just because we're short on time, I'm going to say the most common answer would be Superman, because he can fly and has laser beams. Hollywood has made more movies about who in the past 10 years? In fact, just this year, there's a new movie about Batman. Batman, by far, is a more interesting character. Yet he doesn't have any special abilities. He just has a fancy suit and knows some karate or whatever. But he has a much more complicated and compelling background. If you know anything about Batman, you'll remember that his parents were murdered when he was a young boy. And he grew up orphaned, wealthy, but orphaned. And as he grew, he developed a desire to be a vigilante and crack down on crime in Gotham. It's a far more interesting story. What's my takeaway point? Your son or daughter, I would like them to be Superman, but they don't have to be Superman. They do not have to be invincible. They don't have to have perfect grades. They don't have to have perfect test scores. They do not need to be Superman for me to get them into a top 10 college. What they do need to be is like Batman. They have to be compelling, interesting, and captivating. And that is important. And to be honest, most students aren't. They're boring. But if we work together, we'll turn them into something compelling. All right, let's kind of wrap up some of the tactical points. So the personal statement is very important. Amazing letters of recommendation. Briefly on this point, length matters. Every recommendation by definition is going to be positive. Everyone. But you need a very long and detailed recommendation, 4 to 5 pages. Most recommendations are 1 to 2 pages. If you want to be admitted to a top school, it needs to be 4 to 5 pages. How do you get that? Very briefly, how you get that is you start at the beginning of the junior year. You're going to use teachers from the junior year, and you say, Mr. Smith, Mr. Jones, I'm excited about taking your class. I plan to get an A in your class, and I plan to ask you for a letter of recommendation. Would you mind this year taking very detailed notes on me and my performance? And at the end of the year, if I get an A and I impress you, I hope you'll agree to write me a letter of recommendation. How many high school students do that? Very few. But if you put the teacher on notice and you tell them that you want a good letter of recommendation, they're going to take notes. Your son or daughter is also going to take very detailed notes throughout the entire school year. At the end of the school year, they're going to sit down in office hours, face to face, and say, I got an A. Would you agree to write me a recommendation? The teacher says yes. And then you follow up by say, Mr. Jones, here is a 4 or 5 page bullet pointed letter that I put together of all the things I think I've done that are impressive in your class. And by the way, it's written in third person. I hope these notes that I prepared are helpful as you prepare your letter of recommendation. Guess what? Many teachers are going to cut and paste those bullet points that are written in the third person and use them as inspiration for their letter of recommendation. You can control the outcome of an amazing letter of recommendation. All right. We can talk more about letters of recommendation, but there's many ways to do that. The last point before we'll turn to Q&A is interview performance. And again, you have to be you have to have unbelievable charisma and great at interviews. One of the things I do, many things I do with my students is I have them look at presidential debates, American presidential debates. And you know, what's unbelievable is if you look, I mean, politicians, some of them are awful, but some of them are very charismatic. And if you look at every presidential debate from televised debates that began with Kennedy and Nixon onwards. The candidate that is more charismatic wins. And think about these examples. Al Gore. Some of you remember Al Gore and George W. Bush. I think everyone agreed that Al Gore was a very smart guy. I mean, no one realistically said that Al Gore is not smart. But we didn't vote for the smartest candidate, did we? We elected George W. Bush. He was a likable guy. Most voters said we'd be happy to have a beer with George W. Bush. Time and time again, you look at JFK, more charismatic than Nixon. You look at Bill Clinton, more charismatic than Bob Dole, certainly more charismatic than Bush. You look at Ronald Reagan, more charismatic than Carter. You look at President Obama, whether you like him or not, more charismatic than John McCain or Mitt Romney. Donald Trump, whether you like him or despise him, many people thought that he was telling you what he thought, where many people thought Hillary Clinton was very carefully reading the polls and not telling people what she really thought. Trump definitely was very candid. The point is, in all of these examples, the person that connected with the audience more won. When you're doing college interviews, some of them will be very friendly, some of them will be combative, but you have to be charismatic. Some of your sons and daughters are already charismatic. They won't have a problem. Some of your sons and daughters are nerds and geeks. I say that with love. And they're like, they got to learn a little bit about charisma. We'll get them prepared for that in advance so they can master the interview process. If you happen to have a girl, there's unique opportunities for women in America. There still are these 7 sister colleges. One of my favorite is Barnard College. If you apply to Barnard College, it is only available for women or people that identify as women. You get admitted to Barnard, you end up with a Columbia University degree. So Radcliffe no longer exists. Radcliffe was the women's equivalent of Harvard, but there's still some golden opportunities for women. You can apply to Columbia directly, and Barnard, you get 2 chances to apply to Columbia as a woman. So there's a lot of hidden opportunities. Again, we don't have time to go into that, but we should maximize that. Bottom line, you have to not only be strong in grades and test scores, all these other things you have to master and be exceptional at. So when I work with students, I have a very complicated but step-by-step process. I leave no stone unturned. Every aspect of the college application, I help prepare people for years in advance so that it would truly be exceptional. Find a right mentor. I'd love to potentially help your son or daughter, but whoever it is, don't do it by yourself. This is not a home improvement project that you want to build. You don't want to build a house without an architect. So find the right mentor that matches your son or daughter's personality. Have a methodical process. I think it's very important to start step 1, have a comprehensive evaluation. Understand how your son or daughter thinks. There's at least 8 different types of intelligence. In our common education system, we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that. If you want to transform someone, you must understand how they think and how they learn. If you understand how they think and how they learn, you can then provide content and opportunities that are custom made for them. So that is what my mother did when she homeschooled me. And I went from literally dropping out of 3rd grade and having no future to being very fortunate to starting college at 12, my first patent at 13, doctorate at Harvard, and multiple graduate degrees from many institutions. I understand myself the power of having a good mentor, and I have a passion for helping people learn. Clearly, you want to get your son or daughter into an amazing, high-ranking college. Absolutely. But if they're both admitted to Columbia and Brown, Columbia is going to have a higher ranking, but Columbia is very structured, very competitive, focused on grades. If your son or daughter has a different personality, they might thrive better at Brown, where there's very little competition for grades. There's no pluses or minuses, it's just straight A, straight B. You can take all your classes, pass, fail. You can create your own majors. For some people, that would be a disaster. They need the structure of Columbia. For other free-spirited people, they would thrive at Brown. So when I work with people, not only do we get them into great schools, but I also genuinely focus on how they can become an effective learner. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm going to stop there and let Ray and potentially Cynthia do some moderating. I'm sure hopefully some of you have questions. I really appreciate your attention, no matter where you are, if it's morning or evening. I just want to thank you briefly that being a parent is a thankless task. Your son or daughter may not have hugged you recently. They may have not given you a long, genuine hug. Someday they will. And I hope it's soon. But I want to thank you for being a concerned parent, because it's a thankless task, but it's very important. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Bolger. I was amazed and touched by your presentation. Yes, because recently I've been talking with so many parents. Yeah, I can share one story, and everyone please feel free just to share your questions, and we will collect the questions very soon. So there was this student, he's super excellent, computer science, perfect school, perfect competition, everything, but he got rejected by every good universities. So that student actually went still a good one, but not like a tier 1. So after 4 years of learning, when the dad picked up the student back home, the student said, "You know what, Dad? I never learned anything at this university from a teacher or a doctor or a professor. I self-taught myself during the past 4 years because all of my peers are having fun. They don't really learn." So that made that words make the dad feel really sorry and regretful. What if the son had a better mentor earlier? That would be a different ending. Yeah, and thank you so much, Dr. Bolger. I think if everyone had a you, like an AI version you, everyone can enjoy some mentor, but unfortunately it's very difficult, right? to copy you as AI version. So I
not
think
yet. Yeah.
Thank you. And
next year.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, we do have some comments from the Chinese Zoom version. So we have this audience, like he mentioned that his children, which is like 4-year-old, listen to your presentation, your lecture all the way. And he mentioned like you have an amazing voice, which is super charming, and he followed you to even learn English just now. So it's like a really active and interesting English lesson. And he learned a lot that he had never learned in the Chinese textbooks. That's amazing. And yeah, he felt that you look like Isaac Newton.
Well, it's very nice. Very nice. But I have to say, I think it's a big mistake to look at the internet or read college admissions books. You do not want to follow the advice that most people are receiving. This is a zero-sum game. You're trying to get into 4% acceptance. And so the advice that is being given to many people is not going to work. So in other words, the advice that I give to folks is very unique and uncommon. And so I specifically focus on differentiating. Like, you have to think of your children as like a product. Why does someone buy a BMW, or why does someone buy a Mercedes instead of a BMW? Why do you pick one luxury good over another? Why do you buy a Rolex over a Cartier or a Patek Philippe? The point is, there are points of differentiation, and that's very important to strategically think about that. So I always encourage people, do not listen to typical advice, because that will get you nowhere. Yeah,
thank you. So now we have a question on standardized tests. Some students take more than 5 AP courses, and the other students take only 2 or 3. So is there like a magic number behind behind this?
Yeah. And also so that's a great question. AP courses have become extremely important, especially in this test optional environment, which, again, I said, it's not really test optional. However, AP courses are very important. If you take an AP exam, you have to get a 5. You should never, it is, I think, educational malpractice to submit a score of 3 or 4. From your perspective, a 4 as a parent, be like, oh, this is great. They got a 4. The only thing you've done is you've disqualified your student. If you have a 4 out of 5, you've demonstrated that your son or daughter is incompetent in that subject. I mean, I think that's great, but you're competing with 60,000 other applicants that are perfect. You cannot submit a 4. So with AP scores, you can choose which ones you submit. Now, the problem is if you take a high school class that is AP focused, if you take AP physics and then don't submit the AP score, they know that you got a 4 or less. So if you're signing your son or daughter up for an AP course, they have to get a 5. If they get a 4, you're significantly harming your son or daughter. Now, as you know, you can independently study for AP exams, which I encourage. So I have some students that will submit 12 AP exams, AP exam scores of all 5s. That is fantastic. But we always have to work with the reality. Everyone has limits, right? So if your son or daughter can only take 2 AP courses and get 2 5s, that's much better than taking 4 AP courses and getting 2 4s and 2 5s. It's much better to show your perfection. Again, I advocate a very focused level of accomplishment. So you need to do all 5s. And that's why I like to work with students. If I understand them, I do a 6-hour evaluation. By the way, it's not all 6 hours at one time. I break it up into 3 sessions because students can only usually go for a couple hours at a time. But the point is, I try to advise students to take AP courses if they can get a 5. If they can't get a 5, they shouldn't take an AP course. You do not want to document that your son or daughter is weak in an area, and that's all you're doing. If you get a 4, you've documented that they're the bottom of the competition. So please don't get 4s. Please get 5s, and we have to be very strategic about that. So if I know your son or daughter, I can tell them what courses they should take. They should always take rigorous courses. But if you have to choose between a rigorous course where you're going to get a B+ and a non-honors, non-AP course that'll get you a straight A, always go for the A. So again, your guidance counselor will say, oh, but they're going to look at it's a more challenging course. That's BS. That's outright wrong advice. Always go for the A. Obviously, take a harder course if you can, but you have to choose between an A- and A. Always take the A. If you choose between a B+ and A, always take the A. So you always want to optimize. You always want to get as many AP courses as you can. So that's very important. Again, every student's different. And like the example I gave with a student that studied marine biology, they did not have a lot of APs. They had a very bad GPA. It was like basically a B+ GPA. We still got them into Ivy League school because of the specialization. So every student is different and it varies. But try to get APs. If you can take an AP,
okay.
You can have 5.
Okay, I've seen some interesting comments on the panel on the chat box. I'd like to see if Michael are still here. If you'd like to ask, I think it's a typical question over the 6-hour multiple intelligence evaluation.
Hey, Cynthia. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Hey, doctor. Yeah, I feel so grateful for your sharing. Yeah, my question is for the 6-hour evaluation. I think that's a very important part of the whole process. So my question is it a very systematical process, or just you still need your personal involvement in their evaluation?
Yeah, right now it's very much driven by me. It is a systematic evaluation, but it is a hybrid between a traditional neuropsychological evaluation, which any psychiatrist can do, and a hybrid that uses proprietary questions that are based on the work of Howard Gardner, who developed the theory of multiple intelligences. So it's a hybrid of those, and for that reason, it very much involves my questioning, but they're standardized questions, and it's a very data-driven, calibrated process. And you're absolutely right. It's like, I give an example of being a tailor. If you want a couture dress, if you want a dress that fits your body, a beautiful, elegant ball gown, you have to take a number of measurements. And so you're not going to get a couture dress by just eyeballing it. That metaphorical equivalent is the evaluation is very specific, and depending on how they perform in several stages of the exam evaluation process, then I use different modules depending on where their strengths are. So every 6-hour process is different. If they're very strong, for example, in the quantitative section, then the last 2 hours is very different. If they're very strong, for example, in it's the aesthetics part of the Picasso part, the last 2 hours are different. So part of it is understanding their global abilities, but then it's also drilling down specifically in their specialization, because what we want is to understand what they're good at, and then very importantly, what I call a counterintuitive connection. So ideally, most students are strong in more than one intelligence category. And where we create synergy is, the example I've given is that there's this, kid that, for one reason, Rubik's Cubes were really popular in the 1980s, but for some reason, he was kind of interested in that, and he's a visual thinker. And I literally tracked down Mr. Rubik, who lives in Eastern Europe, and I had him be mentored by him, because that was specifically based on the way he thinks. Like, he literally, his brain is a very visual kind of algorithm on that basis. So based on the evaluation, I was like, look, this is a perfect fit for you. So I love to pair people with world-class experts. And that's based on the evaluation process, to understand you have the potential to legitimately be number 1 or number 2 or number 3 in this niche category. Now let's go about doing that. And that's driven by the evaluation. I mean, there's a certain intuitiveness when I just talk with someone for a few minutes, I could say, all right, here's what it's going to be. So there is some intuition, because I've been doing this for 23 years, but overwhelmingly, I'm very data driven, because it's very important to have a systematic approach. And, ultimately, the next 4 years of college is it's a pivotal point for your son or daughter. So the advice I give is very calibrated, because I understand that, you care about your child. So very important point. I break it up into three sessions, because for young people, 90 minutes to 2 hours is the maximum. You got to be concentrated, etc. But you learn a lot about your son or daughter in the process.
On that interesting note, I also noticed that there's a related question in the chat that I think one of the audience said, unfortunately, not every child has the opportunity to be connected with your Ma. So how do you do so? I think that's the question.
I mean, I work with
how
people.
How can they get the chance to be connected to all the world experts?
So, I mean, I usually work with people that have resources. And if you have resources, I'm very good at connecting people with experts. So that's one approach. And so I love to do that. I love to connect people with outstanding experts in those categories. But if there's more limited resources, there's still a ton of things we can do. So, for example, how many high school students do you know that have a US patent and have published a book? So I've helped students publish books, like real books, not fake books. I'm on the board of directors of Red Hen Press, which is a independent small book press that publishes Pulitzer Prize winners and Nobel Prizes and stuff. So I have insight into publishing experience. I have relationships with literary agents that represent young authors. One of the students, I usually respect the confidentiality of the people I work with, but some of the students I work with are like, yeah, it's okay, you can use my name. I work with Amanda Gorman, for example. You may remember that she was the young lady who was President Biden's inauguration poet, a young African-American girl. I worked with her and I gave her a lot of good advice. She ultimately went on the road with Tracy K. Smith, who's a very famous poet. And years before, she read to Jill Biden, the second lady, when Obama was president. She made a deep impression as a young Black girl on Dr. Jill Biden. And then years later, after the Black Lives Matter movement had happened, they're like, we got to have a young poet who's Black. And they immediately thought about Amanda Gorman. And the advice I'd given Amanda was like, look, you can give poetry readings for free. Get your face in front of people that are opinion shapers. So I'm not directly responsible for that, but I told her to hit the road. She was mentored by an accomplished poet that was not super famous, but relatively famous. She met the right person, and she ended up, reading for a presidential inauguration. That's not typical, but I'm saying you can do that on a budget. You can get a U.S. patent. You can come up with an extraordinarily good idea, and for short money, you can get a U.S. patent. There's a lot of incubator programs in different states where you can go through an entrepreneurial incubator program as a high school student, get a patent, and begin the process of commercializing that. If you are doing that as a high school student, you're going to get yourself closer to being admitted to MIT or to Caltech. So there's a lot of things. So I love to connect people with literally people that are at the top there. And accomplished people love to mentor people that have true potential. And I have the credibility when I connect people. I'm not connecting people that don't have potential. So I have a good track record with that. But there's also things that we can do, like publishing a book, publishing a children's book, things like that, getting a patent and then commercializing it. Things that can significantly move the needle that are very realistic. So I don't use a one-size-fits-all solution, but I do work within the resource constraints of different parents and families. Other questions?
I think there is a interesting and challenging question from Bob. I'm not sure if he is still here, but I think he asked the question to say that it seems to be contradicting when you were talking about try to prioritize subject in the AP that you can get A, but it contradicts with your example of that not everybody needs to have all A's to get into Stanford. For example, that kid who only had 3 APs and 1,400, 1,600, 1,400 in SAT, but still got into Stanford. So I guess there was a little bit of clarification that's needed.
Well,
from
so
you.
Every student I work with, I never tell a student get B's and do poorly on the exams, right? I never say shoot low. I want everyone I work with to get all A's and to get perfect test scores and get all 5s and APs. Of course. I also work with the reality that sometimes, we don't have, you can still, I don't know if you like American football, but you don't have to be undefeated in order to get into Super Bowl. You just have to be better than other players. So I routinely work with students that do not have perfect grades, that do not have good test scores in relative terms, and do not have, I work with students that have no AP. Like if you go to Andover, for example, Andover does not have any AP courses, and yet it's a very prestigious school. So look, I when I work with students, I want them to aspire for the best. I don't ever want to say aim low. But so I'm saying in an ideal world, have as many AP courses as possible, of course. But your son or daughter may not be a good test taker. And the example I gave you of the one student that got into Harvard he did a lot of exploring. He climbed Mount Everest, cage diving. He had terrible grades in relative terms. He had a lot of B's. Still got him into Harvard. So my ideal student would be someone who has all A's and who has great test score and who has all AP scores, AP courses. That's great. But none of us, including myself, none of us are perfect. We live in a very flawed world. So, but I want to give inspiration to students, especially when they're young, to aim high. Do not limit yourself. That's very important. But within the world of reality, most students I work with don't have perfect grades, don't have test scores. I love that because that's why they have to differentiate themselves in so many other ways. Yo-Yo Ma was not necessarily a 4.0 student when he applied to Harvard, but he was exceptional in that area. So what I'm saying is, even if you have great scores, you still have to be interesting. But that Batman example is if you're more interesting than Superman and a little flawed, we can still get tremendous results. So I want people to aim high, but I also am very realistic that people are going to have flaws and we deal with them strategically and tactically. Other questions? I love challenging questions. Please ask challenging questions. Encourage them.
I've seen the trend of another interesting question, which is, for example, from PL, that I think EC is extracurriculum. I see the importance of extracurriculum in application, but if a 14-year-old boy having good academic grades but does not necessarily know his interest, so no motivation for specific club, how does parents or like you able to help them? And there's another question earlier about a 5-year-old. How do we guide our 5-year-old to find the interest? So would you please share how do you do so?
So that's one of the reasons why I do a very comprehensive evaluation, because it's not acceptable. And unfortunately, it's just not acceptable to say, I don't know what I want to do with my life. I meet people who are in their 30s and 40s who are having these so-called midlife crises. I'm sure all of you have met people at the workplace that like are having a so-called midlife crisis. That's not acceptable. I think generally I'm speaking to, I say this with love, a tiger mom or tiger father audience here, which I hope that's a good thing. Look, you need to develop a focus. If you want to be successful in life, if you want to be a successful tennis player, you can't start at 18. Your career is done when you're at 18, right? I mean, so you got to start early in life. And so I do start with a comprehensive evaluation. So I can say, look, whether you know it or not, you are talented in these specific areas. And I'm going to encourage you to lean into this. I specifically, when I was being homeschooled, my mother forced me to be exposed to a variety of things. As a man, my mother forced me to take ballet. I gave up ballet for fencing, which is sword fighting. But guess what? Taking ballet helped me become a better sword fighter, a better fencer. And I'm grateful that she pushed me into that. So we cannot allow people, it's not an acceptable answer to say, I don't know what I want to do. I think it's a genuine answer. And I think we can be very compassionate and say, that's great. Let's start exposing you to a variety of different activities. And I will recommend some activities based on a comprehensive evaluation. And then you need to be exposed to those activities, and something has to get traction and resonate. But you cannot use your high school and just float on by and not know what you're doing. You have to jump in and start swimming to a specific direction right away. And I will help people do that. And it's fine, by the way, to change. You can start swimming in one direction and say, you know what? I wanted to be a surgeon and I decided now I want to be an entrepreneur. But that's fine. So then you can be an entrepreneur. You go into medical devices. You go from wanting to be a doctor and go in the surgery room to being a business person, but you're going to make medical devices. The point is, you can pivot. You can pivot and change, but you have to have a direction. Just to be very blunt, I mean, I don't want to speak like Donald Trump, but you're going to be a loser if you don't know what you want to do in life. Like, if you don't have a direction in life, you will have no direction and you will not be successful. And that's just the reality. So I'm very friendly with students. I'm very nice. But when they say, I don't want to do, I don't accept that as an answer, because they do know. Most students do know what they want. They're too scared to admit their dreams. And in a very compassionate way, I help to say, what do you really want to do? What do you really want to do? And we get to the level where they unpeel that and they do know. I've rarely met a student that truly is clueless about their future. And so I've never had a case where we haven't developed a very productive focus that they're very, very happy with. So that's a great question. Our schools are not helpful in giving people a sense of purpose, but a good mentor that listens to not only what people are saying, but what they're not saying. What your son or daughter is saying and what they're also not saying, you can determine a lot about that direction. So it's important to set a direction. You can't accept people. I mean, like, if you let kids do it, you can't say, oh, I'm going to have a bucket of ice cream. Like, that's not acceptable. It's also not acceptable to play video games. It's a waste of time. And also, another thing about athletics, since I'm speaking to, a particular group of folks, I sometimes will meet a kid who's like 5'1" and he wants to be a basketball player. And I'm like, okay, you're wasting your time. You're not going to get recruited by any college. It's nice you want to play basketball. You should do it for physical health. That's great, but it's a waste of time. It's the equivalent of playing Xbox or PlayStation. You're not going to be athletically recruited. So you should exercise, but you only have 24 hours in a day. And with love, I say, look, we got to cut out all the stuff that's a dead end. And we got to focus on the things that you're truly going to be accomplished with. There are some, there's some Asian parents that insist on their child playing the violin and piano. And if they have a future with it, that's great. But if they're spending, 5 hours a week playing the piano and they're not doing great, cut it out and focus on things where they truly can become excellent. So we have to be, in a very nice way, ruthless with our time. And we need to cut out distractions that are not going to lead to excellence. And there's a lot of things we do that we kind of waste our time with. And so I try to be very nice, but very candid to say, look, it's all this stuff. If you want to do for fun, that's fine. But we got to focus ourselves. We got to focus ourselves and cut out a lot of stuff. Also, you don't need to do 8 activities. I've never met a CEO, except for Elon Musk, that runs multiple companies. Elon Musk seems to have the rare ability to run SpaceX and Tesla and the Boring Company and Neuralink. So he's one person that this example doesn't apply to. But everyone else, you can be a CEO of one company. You don't need to be involved in 8 extracurricular activities. You need to be involved in 1 or 2 that are truly amazing. And you need to then write about that you've done amazing things. Just a quick example, if you found a club, again, this is something you can do with short money. You found a club. I'm going to found some computer science and machine learning club that focuses on the visual arts. Most people just have a bunch of student meetings. With the power of Zoom in your high school, you can start to found a club. You're a founder of a unique club, and then you contact a Stanford professor in computer science, and you get them to come for 20 minutes. They're not going to give you an hour. They'll give you 20 minutes at the time. You contact an art historian at Princeton, and you have them come and speak. You contact an anthropologist at Harvard, and you have them speak. When you apply to college and you have to write about your extracurricular activity, you can say, I've had Professor X from Stanford, Professor Y from Princeton, and Professor Z from Harvard come and speak at my club. No other student's done that. They've just had BS meetings where they've done nothing. So with no cost of money, you can literally have world experts come and speak to your high school club. Now, you're going to get rejected a lot. 30 professors are not going to respond to your email. But if you write 50 emails, you get 3 to show up. The point is, you can do things that are very impressive they just require creative thinking. That's an obvious example. Most students, they're just like, oh, we had a hackathon. Well, so what? Everyone's had a hackathon. But how many students at your high school have had a Princeton professor appear by Zoom? And so there's a lot of things like that you can do that are genuinely impressive, that show you're a leader. You just have to be creative and persistent. So a lot of ideas like that.
Okay, so thank you so much. We have a challenging question, which is tricky. So recently there's a piece of news went viral about Stanley's case. So Stanley is like a perfect gun high graduate, perfect scores, competition like Google and MIT, all the different CS competitions. And he got by 16 universities, like including MIT, Stanford, and so forth, and accepted by 2. So, but Stanley got hired by Google. Yeah. So what do you think of this Stanley's case? Like, what would be the black box there? Got Stanley.
Well, the first thing is I feel for his parents. Students that are unbelievably talented must thank their parents. You can't do it on your own. And as a parent, you're pour your hopes and your dreams into your son or daughter. And if they have worked so hard, they deserve to be recognized on the merit of their accomplishments. So from a justice standpoint, it's terrible news, I think, personally. However, we live in a very unfair world. The reality is, and there's been a Supreme Court decision, for example, about affirmative action and so forth. The reality is that for Asian Americans, for folks from India, from specific places in the world, there will continue to be reverse discrimination. And I'm quite sure as Asians or Asian Americans, folks listening here, you have experienced it, or you know friends and family that have experienced it professionally. It is not going to go away in the admissions process. So this example that you're referring to, I think, is an example of unfairness. And when I work with parents and students, I prepare them for the reality of the world that we have to build in contingencies, because you will not experience a meritocratic environment. You won't. You will experience an unfair experience. And so it's important to apply to a number of colleges. It's important to look at other options. Like I had mentioned, Oxford and Cambridge abroad. You can take a gap year. There's a lot of different things that can be done. But unfortunately, we live in a country where there is injustice for certain groups of people. And I think it's extremely outrageous, very unfair. The one option that I think is important to highlight, every year I have a few clients that have worked with someone else when they've gotten a result they're not happy with. The option that many people don't consider is to transfer. Barack Obama, President of the United States, graduated from Columbia University and then attended Harvard Law School. But he did not start at Columbia. He transferred from a California college that's not very prestigious to Columbia. There's a lot of Elon Musk transferred to the University of Pennsylvania. There's a lot of examples where students transfer to impressive colleges. So I think in a rare instance where you encounter something that's very unfortunate, that you might call into the category of injustice, or, you know, if someone uses another consultant and they get a bad result, I every year help a few people transfer. You have to do 1 year of undergrad at a school. You get good grades and do some really impressive things, but you can then transfer to an even better college. So that's an option a lot of people don't think about. No one really cares where you began. It's where you complete your degree. So I think for these very unfortunate cases, transferring is a possibility. Not an ideal one, but it's a realistic option. So I always try to give people realistic options.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, there's another question. Like, my kid is still quite young, like 12 years old. A kid of what age do you suggest starting using your consultation services?
I have a few clients that are age 10 or younger. I work with a lot of folks beginning as freshmen in high school, but I sincerely love working with younger students. They have to be precocious. Like, if they're unmotivated, then it's not a good match. And so if you have a younger student that has intellectual curiosity or doesn't have motivation, but you think can have a motivation awakened in them, then I don't think it's ever too early. When I work with students at an earlier level, I'm not going to work with them as much, but it's more setting up a foundation and connecting them with the right resources. And then we will increase the intensity of working together once we get into high school. But I think middle school and even grade school is a great way to learn how to learn. And again, it goes back, there's 4 ways of note-taking. How many of you ever had a class on how to take notes? How many of your children, even if they're going to a grade school, ask them, how many of your children have ever had a class or even a lesson in how to take notes? Very few people have. And yet there's 4 different approaches. And again, depending on if you're a visual thinker, or there's some people that need to just write notes and never refer to them. It's a kinesthetic way of learning, right? So if you have a kinesthetic learner, you're going to take notes differently than if you're an audio or visual learner. So there's different ways. It's shocking in America that no one's ever taught that. So when I work with people at a younger age, I focus on really ways to help them think differently and transform their ability to study. Reading comprehension. You can cut the amount of time you spend in studying by 75%. I just, not to be whatever, but when I was at Columbia University, most students take 18 credits, 16 to 18 credits. When I was at Columbia, I did 2 master's degrees. In 1 year, I took 42 credits, not 16 or 18, 42 credits a semester. And I finished both programs #1 in my class because I understood how to read efficiently. Went from being a dyslexic to reading very efficiently, how to take notes, and how to listen to a lecture and understand everything in a comprehensive way. Oh, yes, I'm reasonably smart, but the methods that I use are ones that can be taught, especially at a young age. So, yeah, if you have someone who is 12 years old, I would be happy to set up a meeting or whatever. And I'd have to, some folks are a good match, some are not. So it's not a catch-all, but for the right folks, starting at a young age could be very advantageous.
Yeah, very cool. So, yeah, we can take 3 more questions. Thank you so much.
Great.
Roger. Yeah.
Thanks for sticking on. Everyone who's still here, this is awesome. I appreciate, again.
Yeah, everyone is interested.
This is great that you're here.
Story and answers. Yes, there's a follow-up question about Stanley again. So let's say purely from college prep case, what do you think he can do differently to have better admission results if you were mentored to him like previously?
I don't know enough of the details of his case to comment. It's a great question. I avoid the temptation to give unhelpful advice. So I only give advice to people like some people just say, hey, can I just tell you about my son or daughter for 15 minutes and give me some advice? And I'm like, no. It's like stopping a physician on the street and saying, hey, I think I got my broken leg. Can you just like kind of touch my leg and see if it's broken? A good doctor is going to say, no, we got to have it x-rayed. So I understand some of the facts of the case. I personally am angry about what I perceive as some injustice, but I don't know enough details. And like a good doctor, if you stop me on the street and say, is my leg broken? I'll say, let's take an x-ray, and I can, if you need 5 screws in your leg because your leg is broken, we're going to do that. If your leg is sprained and you don't need screws in your leg, then we're going to do the right thing. So I think there's a temptation to comment. When I make a recommendation, as Cynthia knows, I make a very strong recommendation that's effective, but I only do it when I have enough facts. And so unfortunately, I don't have enough facts, but I can just say it's a very unfortunate case. And I would just apologize on behalf of the academic system. We aspire for a search of truth and justice in academia. And I love education, as you know, I have many degrees. But the people involved in making decisions, in my opinion, are sometimes deeply flawed. And we don't get the right outcomes. So I can just say that for certain.
Yeah, thank you so much for your answer. Yeah, we definitely need enough data to see the whole picture, right? Okay, cool. Yes. So there's a second question, like your approach is to help students to build up the passion that connects to the students and set them up for others. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You have 60,000 applicants. They got to make it into the group of 4%. Everyone is going to have basically good grades, one flavor of good grades, one flavor of good test scores. So those are not going to distinguish you. How do you distinguish yourself? You have to differentiate yourself, and you have to do it in a very unique way. And I'm a person that I really take pride in results. You have one life to live. College, those 4 years are transformational. At Harvard, again, to use a Harvard example, 40% of Harvard undergrads end up marrying other Harvard undergrads. So literally, not only are you being admitted to college and going to find a career, but you're going to find your first spouse. You might get divorced, who knows? But at least your first spouse, you're going to find at Harvard 40% of the time. So the point is, slight joke there. So the point is, it's very important, and I don't believe in luck. I mean, I think that, there's a little bit of luck in life, but in the examples I gave, there's 4 examples I gave, each student was highly focused and differentiated. And so we submitted those applications. 3 of them were early action or early decision or restrictive early action. I knew those applications were going to be successful. I mean, ethically, I can't say I guarantee, but basically I knew they're going to work. I never submit an application. I never have a student submit an application unless we know it's going to work. And so we had things so refined that I knew the filtration process. When you apply, you're grouped by region, by your geography. You're grouped by race and ethnicity until recently. There's a number of ways that your application gets filtered through the process. I know exactly how that process is going to work, and I know based on your differentiation approach where you'll make to the 3rd or 4th round of decisions. So it's a strategy that works because it works.
Yes, thank you so much. So the last question, we have listened to lots of amazing stuff here. Okay, so like for Asian kids, like everyone is doing like tutoring, math, CS, everything, right? So, and the Asian kids, like you mentioned, who are under reverse like discrimination.
Yeah.
So what great strategy or the best strategy you recommend for them to differentiate themselves from their peers?
Yeah, so specifically for this group of students, you are not competing with everyone. You're competing with this specific group of very highly talented and very motivated students. And so, there's several approaches. First is, let's say if you want to study computer science. Last year I got a girl, worked with a girl who was admitted to computer science, who was Chinese American, who got into MIT computer science. That's like next to impossible, right? I mean, that's just like incredibly hard. And when I first started working with her, I was like, is there any way we could not major in computer science? Because like you just made, and you want to go to MIT? I mean, just like you just picked the most hardest thing. Like that's so hard. Look, one approach is to think about what major you're going to pick and optimize that. So for example, some students might pick mechanical engineering, which is less rigorous than electrical engineering or other types of computer engineering. But obviously, once you are admitted to MIT or Caltech or Stanford for mechanical engineering, in the first 2 years, you could switch to computer science. So Carnegie Mellon has a restriction on that. Computer science, you have to apply directly to Carnegie Mellon. You can't switch. So every college has slight differences. So one thing is, if a student is not going to walk on water, I would say, look, I understand that you want to do computer science, but can we look at an orthogonal subject, something that's related, that will allow you to explore your interest, but is not going to be super competitive, like mechanical engineering. So, and genuinely, for example, I've worked with a student that was interested in human prosthetics. Like people lose limbs, they need devices for hands and legs. That involves aspects of computer science and computer programming, but it also involves aspects of mechanical engineering. And I was like, look, if you're sincerely interested in both, why don't we focus on mechanical engineering, get you admitted to MIT or Stanford, and then you can do a dual major of mechanical engineering and computer science. So one approach is to understand where you're going to, what competition you are, and sidestep, pick a different pool of competition. So that's one level. A second is, if you're like, look, but I always want people to be authentic. I don't want to direct people in an inauthentic way. You can't be fake. I mean, there's this college cheating scandal, which I'm sure you heard about a number of years ago, when people were fake. They like Photoshopped themselves into things, and they got caught. They went to jail. It didn't work. So I never encourage people to be fake. So if you can authentically be interested in a less competitive major, but still accomplish your goals, that's one thing to look at. Second thing is, if you're like, Dr. Ben, no, I really love computer science, and that's my major, then I'm like, great, then we got to go all in. But then you have to be better than your competition. And so I've worked specifically with people to design apps that are very focused, that show the capacity of their programming skills, but also to identify an audience, to have it released in the App Store to show that they have 10,000 or more users. So, I mean, if you want to be admitted, you got to outperform the competition. There's no secret to that. Like, in other words, I don't have a trick up my sleeve. What I do is I help people say, here's your goal. It's a very hard goal, and here's where we're starting. And we have to go incrementally up to that goal. And here are the options. If you want to, if you want to be admitted to MIT in computer science, then you're going to have to do something that's legitimately impressive. And I will give you friendly but candid feedback. Your current idea is not going to work, but let's work on this and have different iterations of that. There's some great MIT programs for high school students, ones at Stanford, etc. There's great mentorship opportunities. I love to work with people that have brand names because I think that's another point of differentiation for parents that can afford that. But if you're on a budget, there's incredibly smart graduate students that you can be mentored by. And so there's a number of different ways to do this. Again, I don't give it a one-size-fits-all solution, but I mainly work with parents who are facing incredible competition. So Asian American parents, you get smart kids, but you got incredible competition, and you have reverse discrimination. I'm acutely aware of that. And so when I give you advice, I'm giving you advice to distinguish you from other people in that category. And again, it's you got to outperform, but you can't. It's not like you're best in computer science. You're going to be in a very niche area of a niche area of a niche area. So and if you do that, you're going to connect with one or two professors, and you will get admitted. So it's a great question. I cannot give you one answer, but I can say is it starts with a comprehensive evaluation, and then I deal with people one-on-one. I meet with them. I give very candid advice. I never overpromise. I don't say, oh yeah, this is going to work. I'm like, look, here's what's the goals and what's going to take. And then I put some cold water on students, but I'm very good at actually helping them find their passion. Say, visualize, like when you do a college tour, we should wrap up. I'll just leave you with this. When you do a college tour, don't just take the guided tour. Go into the library. If you have to, like, find a way to sneak into the library and sit in the library for like 45 minutes and look at the other students and say, does this feel like home? Go to the cafeteria, inhabit that space, and do that sooner. Don't wait till they're junior or senior. Do that now so they can visualize that goal. Do you want, whenever, a couple of years from now, to sit in that library as a student at Stanford or at Columbia or at Harvard or wherever, Johns Hopkins or Berkeley or wherever it is, and visualize that? Do you want that? I use a lot of positive psychology, which is not BS, but I use real positive psychology and say, do you want that? Then here's what we have to do. And here are the different steps we have to go. And you are on track or you're not on track. And here's how we have to get back on track to accomplish this. And if you do that incrementally, I mean, everyone thinks that there's magic, but there's not. Incremental steps will lead you to that success. And so you just have to be very driven and focused and methodical and not give up, and perseverance. And you're going to have setbacks. No one is perfect. You're going to have setbacks. You have to deal with them and not give up. So let me just close by saying thank you for this lengthy, but I think very fun session. Please feel free to follow up. I think there's a QR code there. Follow up with Ray or Cynthia, and I'd be more than happy to they can answer some preliminary questions if it makes sense. I'm super busy, but when I agree to work with someone, I don't agree to work with everyone. Unfortunately, there's a little bit of an application process. I take people that are going to win a gold. I take people that generally are going to win a bronze medal in life, and I'm going to push them to win a gold medal, right? Like if you're never going to win, I mean, sometimes I'm like, look, I'm going to refer you to someone else, which is my way of saying it's not going to happen. But generally speaking, we can unlock that potential. And if you're willing to invest your heart and soul, we can find excellence together. And I really want to end by thanking you. Parents are never thanked enough. You save up your money, you give your time, and you have all your hopes and love in your children. And I understand this is a pivotal time. And so I take it very, very seriously. And I would love to potentially help your son or daughter. So thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Much love.
So, guys, we're at the time boundary. There was a few audience that really have any question. They raised their hands for a long while. Unfortunately, we are really at the time boundary. Please get in touch with Ray, or let us know how do we get in touch with you, and we're happy to see your questions. And I will hand it over to Ray to wrap up.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Benjer and Cynthia and everyone here today for this like 2 hour, like 120 minutes, amazing sharing. Yeah, and I got lots of direct message from the audience, lots of questions and appreciation here. Thank you so much, Dr. Bolger. Yeah, lots of nice words, everything here, and I'm just truly appreciate Dr. Bolger, your time, your expertise, and your wisdom, and how much you have supported the previous families, like help their kids not just get into good universities. They found their passion. They made their life, right? They have a very successful life because of you. So, and we really want to have more parents, and you can help more parents to help their kids also find their passion and into their big dream, like universities. Yes, that's our goal. So everyone, please feel free just to scan this QR code. 可以扫描这个二维码. Yes, and also to book a spot, and then we will connect you and Dr. Bolger for a further consultation. Yes.
Great. Have a wonderful night, guys. Good seeing you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend. Have a good night. Have a good morning. Yes. Okay. Bye. 谢谢大家。